Hey, Ray here, back at it again with an Edison Spotlight. And today I'm going to do a bit of a spicy one. I've never seen anyone actually build this specific variant of Uriah. They might have for all I know, but this is the first time seeing of it. This is Tour of Doom Uriah. It's a very gimmicky build that is built around this card specifically. Now, what Tour of Doom does is, during your opponent's standby phase, you toss a coin. If it's heads, your opponent cannot normal or flip summon until the end phase. And if it's tails, your opponent you cannot normal or flip summon during your next turn. Now, what this essentially is a 50% stall card. It's like a 50% chance that you can stop your opponent really playing the game. Now, that's what it usually is. Now the thing is, everything but Uriah, Sengan, and Morphing Jar are trap monsters, like Metal Reflex Slime and Zoma the Spirit. Which means we don't need to summon during our next turn. We can summon during our opponent's turn, which effectively nullifies the downside of this card. Which means that every turn we have a 50% chance to stop our opponent's normal summon. Now in this format, your normal summons are extremely important. Think about Debris Dragon, think about Blackwings often rely pretty heavily on their normal summon to establish a board. Because, you know, things like Blizzard, you know, they need to get that normal summon through to start their players. If they can't normal summon, they can't trigger Black Whirlwind, you know. If this goes off, which, you know, 50% is a surprisingly high chance, you know, you can stop them from doing their thing. And since the rest of your deck is full of cards like Fiendish Chain, which negate effects and stop your opponent attacking anywhere, you know, it kind of all adds up to create this weird long-term grindy game stall strategy, which ends with you summoning a Uriah at the end. We play a lot of consistency boosting cards because obviously we're playing so many traps that there is a decent chance that we'll break. I like to run 2 Gold Sarcophagus. I'd like to think you'd be using this to search Uriah, but I feel like sometimes you'd want to be searching Imperial Custom if you don't draw into it, because it is a pretty key part of the strategy for reasons I'll explain later. Magic Planter helps us with consistency, and if monsters get removed from the field without being destroyed, we will just have dead Fiendish Chains on the field, and Magic Planter helps us clean those up. We run 3 Upstart Goblin because we don't massively care about our opponent's life points and we'd rather just be more consistent. Gravity Bind is a very classic stall card. We can get rid of it to tribute it for Uriah anyway, so we don't mind. Imperial Custom is key to the deck because it means that face-up continuous traps cannot be destroyed by battle or card effect. Battle is important because that means our Metal Reflex Slimes and our Zoma the Spirits and our one-of Stronghold effectively act as like Spirit Reapers, as long as this card's on the field. The reason we do this instead of just running, obviously, cards like Spirit Reaper is obviously it contributes to our overall plan of eventually summoning Uriah. Mirror Force is too powerful of a card to not run in a deck like this, a stall deck, so we run it anywhere. Nightmare Wheel is essentially strictly worse Fiendish Chain, but like we kind of need all of the continuous traps and stall cards we can get, so we run it anyway. Royal Oppression shuts down so many decks that there is no reason not to run it at 2. Skill Drain equally shuts down so many decks that the only card we care about the effect really resolving is Morphing Jar and Uriah. And obviously we'll tribute our own Skill Drain for Uriah, so we don't even really care about it in that situation. And Morphing Jar can be a +5 for us if it actually manages to go through, so it's so powerful that it is completely worth, you know, the setup that it takes. Solemn Judgment is the most powerful trap in the game. The more I play this game, the more I come to appreciate just how good this card is. Like I've said, Tour of Doom is kind of one of the funny, potentially key parts to this strategy. It's very gimmicky, it's not consistent, nor is it reliable. But it's the type of thing, when it goes off, it's so priceless to see your opponent resort to setting dead cards that it's a little bit worth it. Plus, if it forces your opponent to use one of their outs to try and out it, instead of using it on an actually more powerful card, you've essentially forced an out, which is always nice, because that means your other cards are potentially safe. Wall of Revealing Light. This is just more stall. And obviously Zoma the Spirit, when combined with Imperial Custom, becomes a monster that cannot be destroyed. And it also burns your opponent if it gets destroyed, but this isn't really a burn deck, although Nightmare Wheel also burns. We really do just want to be summoning a really big Uriah, normal summon it, activate its effect with priority so that your opponent can't chain anything. Because your opponent cannot, neither player can activate spell or trap cards in response to this effect's activation. So your opponent can't chain anything if you summon it and then activate its effect with priority. So that means you're not going to get Bottomless, you're not going to get Torrential Tributed. So unlike a lot of decks, because there's a lot of gimmicky decks where you have a boss monster, it's all about setting up that big strong boss monster and then you get immediately Bottomless and you have to run cards like My Body as a Shield to compensate for it. Uriah has its own built-in protection, which puts it just a step above the average gimmick boss monster, which is kind of why this deck is playable to begin with. But yeah, that's about it. We run a lot of continuous traps. We hope to stall out our opponent until we can get a big Uriah on the field, and we play lots of consistency boosting cards to make sure that we get to Uriah and get him out for an OTK as quickly as possible. He is boosted by each continuous trap we have in our graves. Obviously Magic Planter can help fuel that, and if our opponent's out at any of them, equally that also helps fuel it. I imagine you can get this guy pretty big, pretty consistently. But I'm gonna be real, this deck probably isn't that fun to play against. I can imagine it being pretty interesting to pilot, however. Again, with control decks like this, I do enjoy playing them, because there's a lot of thinking that just goes into what exactly do you use your traps on. Because I find a lot of the play from these decks comes from understanding what your opponent is playing, because if you know what your opponent is playing, you know how to counterplay, right? You have to ask yourself, what is the choke point in my opponent's combo, right? Let's say I'm playing against Quick Draw Dandy Warrior. Let's say I just shotgun a trap on Debris Dragon. That might not necessarily be the right play, because although if I Fiendish Chain a Debris Dragon, sure, its effect gets negated so the monster doesn't get special summoned, but if they have a Quick Draw in hand, they still might be able to make plays, so that wasn't the correct thing to do. You're going to want to wait and hold off on your traps until you have a good response. For example, you might want to read a lot of your opponent's plays. If you think they're going to go for a Black Rose, hold off the Fiendish Chain for the Black Rose, you know? A lot of people think trap decks are as simple as just, you know, flipping up traps and floodgates and calling it a day, but no, a lot of it is managing your resources, not overcommitting to a board, and playing the slow game. Hard control and stun decks like this make the game a pretty different game, you know? It's a bit hard to explain unless you've played quite a few of them, but this is something I'd recommend trying out at least once if you haven't before. Like, if you're the type of person who plays a ton of combo decks, maybe just sit down, play against a deck you're pretty familiar with, and think, okay, so how can I most mess up my opponent this time, you know? So yeah, let's try some test hands. Doubt they'll be particularly interesting because this is a slow deck and it really needs an opponent to demonstrate counterplay, but, you know, we gotta do it for the video. Alright, so here we are with our test hands. Now, we've opened double Magic Planter. Magic Planter is nice, this is a card we like to see, but not usually alongside a card like Royal Oppression. It's very unlikely for us to open this, both of them in our opening hand, because obviously it's semi-limited. So our play here becomes, what do we want to set? Now, setting your most powerful card turn 1 is generally never the correct idea. In your opponent's opening hand, that is when they are most likely to draw into a card like Heavy Storm. Heavy Storm is the scariest card for back row decks, but it is also the one most likely to come up, unfortunately. Because obviously, you know, you draw 6 cards essentially in your opening hand. If you're going to draw it then, it's much more likely than late game. So there's two philosophies to this. You set cards that you wouldn't mind losing first turn, that wouldn't completely throw your plan off kilter if they got rid of. Or you try and bait out the Heavy Storm so that they don't get access to it for the rest of the game, so you can pretty happily just set your back row and go from there. Now, we have a Solemn Judgment in hand. This gives us a really good way to out the Heavy Storm, because Solemn Judgment can out anything, and as far as cards go that can out it, yeah, nothing really does it better than Solemn Judgment. But the safe option here would just to be set a Nightmare Wheel and waiting until we either draw into Imperial Custom, or if we're that desperate, we can Gold Sark for it. These are the types of like thought you have to have when playing a deck like this. Alright, let's go again. Ooh, this is a weird one. Double Imperial Custom and Metal Reflex line. It stops our opponent from Heavy Storming. Right? So that's... Well, obviously, the first thing you do is see what your upstart would draw you into. Oh, Tour of Doom! Okay, now we don't necessarily want Tour of Doom here, because we have Morphing Jar. But equally, do we... You know what, we just set everything, I feel. If this was turn 1... Do we care, ultimately, about losing the Well, we can tribute the second Imperial Custom later. Yeah, I don't feel like we set the Morphing Jar here. We would just use the Metal Reflex Lime, and with Imperial Custom, it's immune to battle anyway, so... Yeah, there's a lot more that goes on in terms of thought in these decks than it might seem. And if we do go decide to go for the Tour of Doom play, and we can't normal summon next turn, that's fine. We can still special summon Uriah, for one, so that's fine. And then we could probably go for a more aggressive play. Let's see, Royal Oppression, Stronghold, Fiendish Chain, Magic Planter, Uriah, and Sangan. See, interesting one. Fiendish Chain's really nice with Magic Planter. So I wouldn't mind setting that going first. If we set the Sangan, set the Fiendish Chain, I feel like that's the best thing we can do here. Then we can Morphing Jar by searching it off the Sangan, and then hope we draw into enough traps off the Magic Planter to special summon that Uriah. Then if we manage to resolve the Morphing Jar, we are so ahead on card advantage and have a really heavy, like really strong body on the board, which is pretty hard to out. I don't know, that does feel kind of correct. See, there is more thinking than you'd expect in these decks. Let's go one more. Alright, so Imperial Custom, Mirror Force, Royal Oppression, Skill Drain, and Zone of the Spirit. Oh, this doesn't feel so good. Because these are all of our power cards here. We'll obviously have to tribute Skill Drain off for our Uriah. That's alright. That's something we can live with. Mirror Force is not a continuous trap, surprisingly enough, so it does not have the protection that Imperial Custom offers. However, if we were to go Imperial Custom, Royal Oppression, Skill Drain, in theory they'd be protected, but it never feels good having to, you know, push so hard with your most powerful cards. But equally, Royal Oppression, Skill Drain essentially is a lock that a lot of decks just can't out. So, like, equally, yeah, that seems like that would be right. So let's just say, you know, hypothetically, what would we draw next turn? Yeah, just another continuous trap. So yeah, we would be making a Uriah push here. Alright, let's ditch the upstart. I feel like we Tour of Doom for one turn. If it goes our way, we basically say, okay, it's stalled for a turn, we've done what we need it to. Magic Planter it away, draw 2, set the Morphing Jar, set the other Magic Planter, and we go from there. Again, Morphing Jar is too good if it resolves for us to not do it. People generally don't play around Morphing Jar because it's a one-off in this format, and the chance of it coming up is pretty low. Often when people see a face down, they expect it to be Spy or Raikor, and they'll play around it accordingly. So if it's a Morphing Jar, you will often make them ditch their opening hand. And if that gets rid of something they were holding on to, even better for you. So yeah, this has been Uriah Control with Tour of Doom. I hope you guys have enjoyed the theory behind this one. I gotta admit, this deck's more interesting than I originally gave it credit for, so, you know, if this interests you, maybe give it a try. And as always, I'll leave the deck list in the description, and have a good one.